Welcome back, everyone. I'm Pedro, and I spend my days buried in numbers, bond yields, inflation data, and fiscal forecasts that most people would rather ignore. If you care about what's really happening in the financial world, not just the headlines, hit that like button, subscribe, and check out my Patreon and Facebook for more deep dive content. Now, let me tell you something that's been keeping me up at night for the past year. Over the last 12 months, one number has kept me awake at night: global public debt. According to the IMF's October 2025 Fiscal Monitor, total government debt worldwide now exceeds 97% of global GDP. If current spending continues, we'll cross 100% by 2029, and in a pessimistic scenario, we could hit 123%. That's not an abstract statistic. It's a macro time bomb ticking underneath the world economy. Let's begin with the basics. Government debt is, at its core, a promise to pay future income for present comfort. Debt is created when governments spend more than they collect in taxes. To fill that gap, they issue bonds, essentially IOUs, to investors, banks, and foreign sovereign funds. In moderation, debt is healthy. It funds infrastructure, innovation, and social stability. But beyond a threshold, it turns from lubricant to poison. The post-2008 era rewrote that threshold. Near-zero interest rates made borrowing almost free, so politicians everywhere stopped worrying about fiscal limits. Then COVID arrived, and fiscal discipline evaporated completely. Between 2020 and 2023, the world added over $20 trillion in new sovereign debt. Stimulus checks, wage subsidies, health expenditures, all necessary, but collectively historic. For comparison, the 2008 financial crisis increased global debt by roughly $7 trillion. The pandemic tripled that. When rates were near zero, debt felt painless. But as inflation returned, central banks hiked aggressively. The U.S. federal funds rate jumped from 0.25 to 5.5% in barely 18 months. The math changed overnight. What was once manageable became compounding interest. Let's map the terrain. The United States sits at roughly $34 trillion in federal debt, about 125% of GDP. Interest payments alone are over $1 trillion a year, surpassing defense spending. Japan leads the ratio race at 260% of GDP, sustained only by domestic investors and yield curve control. Italy hovers around 145%, France 112%, the UK 102%. Meanwhile, developing economies like Brazil, India, and South Africa face twin pressures: weaker currencies and dollar-denominated liabilities. In finance, we call this the debt pyramid. Rich nations borrow cheaply and perpetually. Poor nations borrow expensively and desperately. Debt isn't just a pile of numbers, it's a feedback system. Higher debt means higher bond issuance. Higher issuance pushes yields higher. Higher yields raise interest costs. And higher interest costs lead to even more debt. This recursive spiral is self-reinforcing until something breaks. Historically, there are only three exits: austerity, politically toxic; inflation, economically regressive; default, systemically catastrophic. Most governments choose inflation, letting prices quietly eat away at the debt. When prices rise, nominal GDP also rises, so debt to GDP ratios look better on paper. It's fiscal cosmetics, but real purchasing power collapses. For households, that means eroded savings and higher costs of living. For markets, it means volatility, because investors demand higher yields to offset inflation risk. You can't cheat compound interest. You can only disguise it for a few quarters. We've been here before. After World War II, the United States carried 120% debt to GDP, but post-war productivity, a baby boom, and technological expansion diluted the ratio within a decade. Contrast that with Japan's stagnation since the 1990s: huge debt, near-zero growth, deflationary trap. Or with Latin America in the 1980s, where dollar-linked borrowing triggered mass defaults. The pattern is clear. Debt isn't fatal by itself. What kills economies is slow growth combined with high interest rates. Exactly today's environment. The IMF's 2025 report reads like a pre-mortem. Without fiscal consolidation, global debt dynamics risk entering an unsustainable trajectory. Translated, if governments don't tighten budgets soon, debt will compound faster than growth forever. And forever, in finance, means collapse. For investors, debt isn't just macro noise, it shapes everything. Bond markets set the benchmark for asset pricing. When yields spike, equity valuations compress, and capital flees risk. The 2022 bond rout erased trillions in global wealth. Long-duration assets like tech stocks and real estate took the hardest hit. If yields rise another 100 basis points, the shock could echo 1994 or even 2008. Currencies tell the same story. The dollar stays strong because everyone else is weaker. But sustained U.S. deficits eventually test that privilege. When confidence cracks, even reserve currencies wobble. Debt isn't just economics, it's diplomacy. China holds over $800 billion in treasuries. Oil exporting nations recycle petrodollars into Western bonds. When those buyers lose appetite, interest rates climb. When they sell, liquidity vanishes. Debt becomes leverage, financial and political. And in a fractured world, that leverage cuts both ways. So where do we go from here? Scenario 1. Governments implement disciplined fiscal reform. Painful, but sustainable. Scenario 2. They inflate away the burden. Easy, but corrosive. Scenario 3. The system resets through crisis. A hard reboot. If history is any guide, policymakers will flirt with all three before admitting reality. If you're an investor, keep your eye on three signals. Real yield spreads. When inflation-adjusted yields turn positive, tightening is working. Debt servicing ratios. Interest payments as a share of tax revenue. And market breadth. Shrinking liquidity means stress is near. Smart money moves before the headlines do. For households, a high-debt world means fewer safety nets and higher volatility. Diversify income streams. Hold assets that survive both inflation and deflation, productive equity, scarce real estate, and intellectual capital. And keep learning economics. Ignorance is the most expensive asset you can own. Global debt is the shadow side of prosperity. It lets us live beyond our means, but only for a while. Every dollar borrowed is a claim on the future. And when the future arrives, someone must pay. The question for the coming decade isn't if we'll pay the price. It's who will pay it and how painful it will be. I'm Pedro, a kiddie Wall Street writer who believes context matters more than headlines. If you want to understand the forces moving markets, subscribe, because numbers tell stories, and this story is just beginning. Debt equals time borrowed from the future.